here is the result of our 6 different seed starting recipes, and I've also tested our soil block recipes. So we're going to go over the difference between this recipe, and all 6 of these seed starting recipes. Have you ever been at the store getting all of your seeds and your seed starting materials and wondered which of these seed starting soils is the best one to use? Well, here's the surprise. It really matters which one you use. It can make or break your gardening season. So I've tested 6 seed starting soils, including 4 that you're going to find most commonly at big box stores, and we're going to find out which one is best and which one was the worst. Let's go. We're going to start with the one that is the most ubiquitous, which is the Jiffy Seed Starting Mix. And the Jiffy Seed Starting Mix is usually very available at big box stores, garden centers. It's mostly peat moss with a little bit of vermiculite and maybe some other things mixed in there. The next one that I'm going to be testing is another one that's widely available, which is Miracle-Gro Seed Starting Potting Mix. Yeah, it's probably got like Miracle-Gro in it, which is not something that I like to use. I also grabbed Black Gold Seedling Mix. This might be one that's very available for you too, depending on where you are. Now remember, this one is listed with the OMRI certification on it, so that's always a good thing, but contains peat. I'm going to be testing these side by side with 2 of my recipes. One is going to be the coconut coir based recipe using coconut coir, coco loco, and green sand. And then the other one I'm going to be testing is our newer recipe that uses wool pellets. So the newer wool pellet recipe. And then the last one I'm going to be testing is a mix of perlite, vermiculite, and peat, because you guys asked me to do that one. Now you know that normally I do not use anything with peat. So it hurt my soul to buy a bag of peat, but I'm doing it in the name of science. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to show you how to fill these seed trays, but I think all you care about are the results. So just skip ahead a couple of minutes if you want to get to that point. These are the seeds that I'm going to be using to test. I'm going to do tomatoes in each one, 3 tomatoes in each one, and 3 radish in each one. Radish germinate and grow really quickly, and so do tomatoes, and tomatoes are something that we grow a lot of, and probably you do too. So these are 2 that I wanted to test. We're going to test all 6 of these using these 2 different seeds. These are from Botanical Interest, great company, check them out. Let's do a quick visual examination of our first one, which is the Miracle-Gro. Right out of the gate that there's peat, because I actually really hate using peat because it's so hard to hydrate. It's so hard to get wet, it just floats away in your tray. So I'm actually going to take my Miracle-Gro seedling tray. I'm going to fill this up, and then I'm going to wet it before I put my seeds in, because if you try to wet peat, like once it's in these containers, it doesn't work very well. What? There's a stick in here. This is a full stick. Black Gold. This is Sun-Gro Black Gold Natural and Organic Seedling Mix. Contains excellent germination, it says. You'll love the results. Silicone enriched. Why do I want silicone in my seed starting soil? Improves resistance to wilting. Holds water, I would guess. But okay, all right. Visual exam on this one. Also very peaty. Definitely peat in this mix as well, but less sticks also. There's not like big sticks like there was in the Miracle-Gro. Next up, we've got the Jiffy. Shout out to Adrian. Thank you for lending me some of your Jiffy. Doesn't look like, it looks like more, there's vermiculite in here. Obviously very peat heavy as well. Jiffy man. Jiffy is what I started the farm on. Like I started a lot of stuff in their little rehydratable pods the first year. Although I do still find them still. They say those peat pods that you can get from Jiffy are biodegradable. Let me tell you, they are not. 5 years later, I'm still finding them in my field. So don't believe the hype on that one. Okay, next up I'm gonna make the one that I was requested to make, which is a mix of equal parts vermiculite, perlite, and peat. This is one that apparently has been floating around. I don't know if it was viral or if it was just popular in a popular reel, but this is one many of you requested I try. So, all right, peat. And this is equal parts by volume, not by weight. This is not my recipe, remember, so don't come at me with questions. I don't know. To me, my hypothesis is, now I don't want to have confirmation bias, which is why I'm testing these. My hypothesis is that this one does not have much going on in terms of nutrients. There's really nothing in this recipe to give it nutrient value, so I feel like you're going to have to be fertilizing this a lot. That's just my theory. All right, so I've got my peat and my vermiculite. Last up is the perlite. Let's give it a mix. You know, a mixy poo. It does hydrate better than the peat by itself. The vermiculite is good for that. Peat, vermiculite, perlite. If you're wondering why I make these faces when I have to work with peat and why I don't like peat, it's because the harvest of peat itself is really unsustainable. Peat is our biggest carbon sink. Actually, peat sequesters more carbon in peat bogs. I believe it's something like 5% of the world's carbon is stored in peat bogs. So when we harvest that, it releases a lot of that carbon into the atmosphere. Okay, the last two, now I will say I'm doing all of these in trays because I don't know how they would do in soil blocks. Never tried it. If one of these recipes seems to work really well for soil blocks, then maybe I'll try it. Actually, you know what? That's a lie. I won't, because I don't want to start using peat anyway. So hopefully mine will be better. Now, these next two recipes, remember, are my recipes that I've created. These work for trays and soil blocks, these recipes. All right, so this recipe here is 4 parts peat-free Coco Loco potting soil plus 1 part wool pellets. If you want to watch more about this recipe, go over to our wool pellet recipe, but this is what the wool pellets look like. This has already been mixed together, so I'm not going to remix this, but this is Coco Loco potting soil and wool pellets. 4 parts Coco Loco, 1 part wool pellets. This last recipe is Coco Loco. So I've got some Coco Loco here. Oh, I need my green sand, so it's green sand, Coco Loco, my coconut coir. The downside of it is it can be salty depending on your source. It comes in a block like this that you rehydrate, and then it gets kind of nice and fluffy like this, very similar to peat. Coconut coir goes in. My Coco Loco potting soil gets mixed in with that. Okay, so I've got that, and then you put a little green sand in. Green sand is just from, it's an oceanic mineral. It's from the ocean, and it has some like minerals and probably a little bit of a low amount of NPK in it. All right, mix that together. This is the soil block recipe with the coconut coir. Again, you can use this one for soil blocks as well as trays. Coco coir / Coco Loco / green sand. So here we have our flat of all 6 of our different tests that we are running. I'm going to go ahead and seed half of these with tomatoes and half with radish. So each recipe is going to get 3 tomatoes and 3 radishes, so that in case there's like a bad seed, that doesn't throw off the testing. Okay, it has been about 4 weeks. So when we're looking at our 6 recipes that we tried from here over, these 4 are all our peat-containing recipes. Over here we have non-peat recipes. So we're going to analyze these peat versions first, and then we'll look at the peat-free. Okay, so if we are looking at our seed starting mixes, I'm going to start with this one over here. And this one over here actually surprised me the most because I had the lowest expectations of it. So this one is our Miracle Grow. So the Miracle Grow seed starting mix, I actually had low expectations for. So this just goes to show you that, it's not always what we think is going to be the best mix. Now, Miracle Grow does tend to have a reputation of having lots of salty fertilizers in it. And so personally for me as a preference, I prefer not to use Miracle Grow as a soil in my garden because once my plants are out in my beds, I want them to utilize the soil biology and let that be what is creating the nutrient mineralization versus relying on fertilizers and then the soil becoming dependent on that. So I don't like to use Miracle-Gro in my garden. Synthetic fertilizers have also been shown to really be detrimental to soil health and to soil life. So when it comes to putting things like Miracle-Gro into my garden or other synthetic fertilizers, I stay away from it because I'm really trying to optimize my soil health and my microbes. So the Miracle-Gro, however, in a seed starting situation is not always going to be a horrible thing because these don't really have a lot of soil microbes to pull from. When we're talking about out in the garden, there's lots of microbes, mycorrhiza, fungi, bacteria that are present in the soil that are going to help these guys to grow. But when they're in a seed starting tray, that's not so true. So that's why we tend to fertilize seedlings a little bit more often. So the Miracle-Gro mix, actually for a peat containing mix, is the winner. The next winner that I found was actually Jiffy. So here we have our Jiffy seed starting mix. This one is very common and easy to find in those big box stores. And you can see that the plants grown with the Jiffy are quite healthy. They were fairly consistent. Now we are starting to see a little bit of yellowing of leaves. So that's something that we're going to want to start to keep an eye on, which we're really not seeing with the healthier Miracle-Gro or these ones over here that are, we'll talk about these in a minute, but we are starting to see a little bit of yellowing of leaves, so that could be indicating some nitrogen deficiency. Now, I have not fertilized any of these seed starting soils, so because I didn't want that to skew the results, I wanted to see, okay, if we're looking at unfertilized seedlings, what are these results going to look like? So that could be why we're starting to see some of this yellowing of leaves, is because the Jiffy mix is mostly peat and vermiculite and not much else. So there's not a lot of nutrients in this mix. So when we're looking at this one, that's why we're starting to see some yellowing of leaves. But overall, I think this one would actually probably do okay if you gave it some supplemental fertilizer like our stinging nettle fertilizer or fish emulsion on a weekly basis. The third performer here of our peat containing soils was actually, this was our mix. This was the mix of peat, vermiculite, and perlite. This is one that I've been seeing floating around the internet. Now you can see the tomatoes are doing fine. I mean, the radish, actually this one over here did not germinate, but I think that's probably a seed issue, not a soil mixture, because obviously these ones all germinated just fine. You can see the difference. These seedlings all fairly consistent, but definitely not as big as their neighbors, because there's really not anything in this mix that's going to give these seedlings any kind of nutrients. So again, we're talking about vermiculite, perlite, and peat. That's it. There's not much nutrients in any of those three ingredients. So this one really not performing super well, but they're also not dying. I mean, I guess it's okay. And the worst performer of our 4 peat-based seed starting soils is clearly this one over here. And this is our black gold organic seed starting soil. This was disappointing. I really had high hopes for the black gold. I was hoping that it would perform well. I'm suspecting that there's maybe some kind of unfully broken down organic matter in this mix, or something else is causing some nitrogen robbing, because you can see we have quite a bit of yellowing leaves, especially on these radishes. And while the tomatoes germinated, that's pretty much all they've done. They really haven't grown at all beyond that germination stage. In fact, they've just put on their first set of true leaves, so definitely coming along slowly. All right, let's move over to our peat-free mixes. Now, both of these peat-free seed starting mixes, remember, are ones that I've done from my own recipe. So we're going to look at them in soil blocks as well as in the trays. And I'm going to talk about what I think happened with my wool pellet recipe, because it didn't perform as well as I would hoped. And when we look at our soil blocks, interestingly, the wool pellet version performed better. So let's take a look. So if we zoom out and compare this recipe to the rest, you can see it is performing quite well and consistently quite well. It's not just 1 or 2 seedlings that are doing well, it's all of them here. So this is our coconut coir recipe, and this was one of our first soil block recipes that we published, and I've used this one for years. It works quite well. And until I started looking for alternatives to coconut coir, because there are some concerns with labor usage and just miles that coconut coir is being transported, we started looking for alternatives, and that's why we kind of pivoted away from this one. But as you can see from our tray, it is performing quite well. Oh, I love the smell when you rub tomatoes. You know that smell. So here we have our 3 tomatoes. All of them germinated quite well. They are growing and putting on leaves very healthfully. In fact, I think these ones look better than our Miracle-Gro version. So this one with the Coco Loco, the coconut coir, and the green sand, which is a mineral. So our radish also looking quite healthy here. And these 6 to me look quite healthy. I'll just show again that this is the coconut coir, Coco Loco, and green sand recipe that I've come up with. And we also use that one, remember, in soil blocks. Now let's look at this is our wool pellet based recipe. Now some interesting things going on here. And I think what happened, now we had fine germination, but they did germinate slower and later than the other recipes. And what could have happened is a couple things. Number one, I had them on this heat mat, which is kind of old. I think it's heating a little bit unevenly because we're having the same problem with this soil block tray. It's not germinating in a couple of spots. I think it's not heating as well. But the other issue I think is that I need practice with growing in trays anymore because I mostly grow in soil blocks now. I have kind of forgotten how to grow in a tray. And the good and bad of the wool pellets is that they do hold on to moisture. They are very good at moisture retention. So this is a great thing in a soil block. Moisture retention is a really, really good thing. You can see our 3 recipes. We're going to talk about those next. But moisture retention when you're in a tray can be a bad thing. So if this is too wet, these are going to not perform as well. And I think that's what happened, is that the wool is so very good at retaining moisture that these stayed a little bit too wet. Now I'm dialing back on watering them, so we're going to tune back in about 4 weeks and see how these are all doing at the 4-week mark. But my theory is that these are going to be doing better once I stop watering them as much. But between these 2 peat-free recipes, obviously, if you're growing in a tray, the coconut coir based recipe with the Coco Loco, the green sand, and the coconut coir is doing much better, and I'll link that video in the description below. Okay, so those were our results for our tray grown seedlings, but I want to look at our soil blocks as well, because if you're a soil blocker or you're dabbling in soil blocking, I think it's important to show the difference. So if you tuned into my last video where we were talking about the wool pellet soil blocking recipe, you may have seen that I showed that seedling, and it was still fairly young at that point, although we had tested this recipe already, but one of the seedlings that was grown with the wool pellets was looking much healthier. Even though it was planted later, it was looking healthier than the one started with leaves, and it was even starting to catch up with the one that was started with coconut coir. So I wanted to take a look at them today. So here we have our 3 recipes. This was the one that was started with the dried leaves. You can see quite sad still. It hasn't really caught up, clearly, to the other ones, still quite different. We have some yellowing of leaves. It's starting to grow, but it's still stunted compared to the other ones. So as a reminder, these 2 were actually started at the same time. This is that coconut coir recipe that we said looks really good in the trays. This is that coconut coir recipe in block form. Same exact recipe, we just made it into soil blocks, right? Using our handy dandy soil blocker. If you want to learn how to use this, we have roughly 1 million videos on it on our channel. Just hit the back button and find one. And then this one was started 10 days after this one, using our wool pellet recipe. So this one uses Coco Loco and wool pellets, and that's it. So very interesting to me to see the difference in these seedlings. And I'll show you the top-down view because I don't want you to think that I'm just showing you like the front 2 seedlings and saying, look how much better they look. Consistently across the board, the wool pellet ones, considering they were started almost 2 weeks later, look better than the coconut coir. Although they both look good. They're both good recipes to use. Let's look at them from the top. Okay, so here's our top-down view. Same size soil blocks. So these are the 1.5-inch blocks. And you can see we have some air-prooting roots here starting to come out the sides. These are ready to get planted. 1.5-inch blocks with the wool pellets. And then if you compare them with our coconut coir-based recipe, now we just starting to see maybe some roots, but also interestingly was that the wool pellet recipe seemed slightly less prone to algae. And I think that was because we talked about the difference in the water needs when we're talking about trays and the wool pellets, how the wool pellets retain moisture. We don't have to water the wool pellet soil blocks as often because it retained the water. So these ones actually had slightly less algae overall over the coconut coir recipes. So I thought that was interesting. But you can see we're starting to see a little bit of yellowing of leaves. Now, again, we haven't fertilized these ones either in the nature of keeping this test somewhat scientific, but starting to see a little bit of yellowing. That could also just indicate that they're ready to get planted out. But how much healthier it started 10 days later these wool pellet soil blocks were. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it means it's hard to judge. You know, I think sometimes we get a little bit, and this is myself too, I get a little bit judgy maybe and uppity about thinking that, you know, a certain brand is not good or a certain brand is good just based on a label. And the results are in the results. I tried to use 4 that, you know, are the most commonly available to me in big box stores or garden centers when I tested these 4 recipes because I wanted this to be very helpful for you all. But again, not always, you know, I would have thought that the Miracle Grow one was not going to do very well, and I was wrong. So who knows? I would have thought that the Black Gold was going to do very well, and not very well at all. So when it comes to, I'm going to come back, so you have to subscribe. Sorry. Please subscribe and like, you know, all the stuff. But in order to come back and see, because in 4 weeks I'm going to do an update. And I'm going to do an update to show how these guys are all doing 4 weeks down the road. Again, no fertilizer. And we're going to see what's happening with each of them, because I think that's really important just to see how the seed does on its own basis. If we have a mix that we don't have to fertilize, that's obviously the winner to me. And yeah, I guess that's it, guys. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot here at the farm. And let me know, what do you want to see next? See you next time in the garden or the greenhouse.